This is Arab Talk on KPOO 89.5 FM in San Francisco. This is Arab Talk with Jess and Jamal. I'm Jess Jamal.
And I'm Jamal Dejani.
Jamal, not even 1 month into the Trump 2.0 administration, the world globally is facing profound implications with tariffs, with shutdowns, with infiltrations in American, super secret secure systems that the shadow Musk administration is infiltrating as we speak. Things are in a complete upheaval. And in the midst of all of this, Gaza and Palestine are clearly in Trump's sights. Just in the last 24 hours, he reiterated his plan to remove all Palestinians from Gaza. He also announced that they will have no right to return. He's basically telegraphing ethnic cleansing and war crimes before the entire world. And Palestinians in Gaza have responded with a resounding absolutely not. Today, at the time of this show, King Abdullah will be meeting Trump. He's already announced that his plan is to force King Abdullah and President Sisi of Egypt to accept over 2 million Palestinian refugees into Jordan and Egypt. Both countries have categorically rejected this idea, but Trump says he will cut off aid to both Abdullah and to Sisi if they reject his ID. So, Jamal, this is what confronts us right now. We're going to be talking about all of these issues today, but before we do that, we're going to watch a fantastic interview that you did with U.S. policy fellow at the Palestinian think tank and policy, Tariq Kenney-Shawa, is going to detail how the ceasefire could be nothing more than a pause for Israel to regroup and continue its killing and ethnic cleansing of Palestinians from their ancestral lands. It's a very powerful interview.
Yeah, that's right. And just a reminder that when I spoke to Tariq, this is before Trump made all his additional statements about taking over Gaza. And well, he made that taking over Gaza, but that Palestinians won't be able to return. And of course, we'll talk about the ultimatum that Trump gave to Hamas, that if they don't release all the hostages by this Saturday, by noon, I think he said, let hell break out. That I'm quoting from the president. But first, let's watch Tariq. The epic flow of tens of thousands of Palestinians in Gaza returning north to their homes after 15 months of Israeli bombardment and imposed starvation is profoundly moving. Undoubtedly, the ceasefire has saved countless Palestinian lives and given them desperately needed relief and life essentials. The big question is, will it hold, and what are the next plans for Gaza by the powers that be? As we've been witnessing, Israeli military and settlers are invading and evacuating large swaths of the West Bank, reenacting the tactics used in Gaza by demolishing homes and expelling the Palestinians. In his recent article in the Babbler, A Ceasefire Is Not Enough, Resisting the Next Phase of Ethnic Cleansing in Gaza, Tariq Kenney-Shawa details how this ceasefire could be nothing more than a pause for Israel to regroup and recontinue its killing and ethnic cleansing of Palestinians from their ancestral lands. Tariq is a U.S. policy fellow at the Palestinian think tank and policy network Al-Shabaka. Welcome to Arab Talk, Tariq.
Thanks for having me, Jamal.
Regardless of whether one considers the current ceasefire bona fide or not, the suspension of Israel's bombardments and aid blockades are desperately needed by the Palestinians in Gaza. How does one couple that relief for them with the dread that anything might provoke Israel to resume its genocidal attacks?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think our understanding kind of hinges on this kind of conundrum in which as you said yourself, the ceasefire is bringing so much relief to millions of people. Quite literally, I mean, we were at a point where dozens of Palestinians were being slaughtered every day, and obviously Israel has broken the ceasefire several times. I think around, I don't have the number exactly on me, but dozens of Palestinians have been killed since the ceasefire went into effect in Gaza. So Israel is breaking the ceasefire, but the numbers of people killed is much declined, and that's something that we need to honestly cherish and be extremely grateful for. Is that people aren't being slaughtered in the numbers they were being slaughtered in before the ceasefire was reached. However, I think we also have to be realistic in terms of our expectations, right? I think Israeli leaders across the political spectrum are extremely dissatisfied with what they claim as not achieving Israel's war goals in Gaza. And obviously this has different meanings for different people within Israel, but we've already seen threats by the far right leading members of Israel's current governing coalition. Figures like Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir have already threatened or have already left the governing coalition over Netanyahu's agreeing to the ceasefire. So there's immense pressure from Netanyahu to resume the war, to resume the genocidal assault on Gaza after this first phase has passed, after the initial 33 or so hostages have been released. So I think we really need to kind of take a step back and really think about the reasons why Israel has agreed to the current ceasefire. Combine that understanding with the existing pressures that Netanyahu faces to resume the bombardment, to resume the assault, so that we can prepare for what's coming next, so that both we in the Palestinian diaspora and everyone else isn't taken aback if Israel does resume its offensive.
Stepping away a little bit from the euphoria of the ceasefire, which as you reiterated, that it brings relief, but once reality sets in, much of Gaza is rendered toxic by Israel munitions and chemicals. People are returning to see their homes destroyed, totally destroyed. Basically, they cannot move into them. We are still in the peak of winter, and how vast is the trauma that Palestinians will suffer upon returning, basically, to their destroyed homes and neighborhoods?
It's immense. It's unspeakable. I as someone who is not there, I can't speak to it. But even from just the images that we've seen and the data that we've seen coming out of Gaza, 92% of all homes have been either destroyed or damaged. Over 60% of all built structures within the Gaza Strip have been destroyed. In constructing Israel's military corridors and expanding the security, quote unquote, buffer zone that surrounds the Gaza Strip, Israeli forces have taken over 36% of the Gaza Strip's territory. So, like you said, Israel has pursued a deliberate policy of rendering Gaza unlivable for 2 million Palestinians who call it home. And see, this is where we need to be vigilant and realistic in what this ceasefire means in terms of the next step. Keep in mind that at the beginning of Israel's genocide, Netanyahu said that his goal in Gaza was to thin out the population. These are his words, thinning out the population of Gaza. So he achieved the first step, which was killing tens of thousands of Palestinians in Gaza. That achieved the first step of this thinning out process. But the next step, which is ongoing, is this long-term ethnic cleansing process. And I think it's really important to highlight that ethnic cleansing doesn't need to happen in one fell swoop. It does. It's not always. Yes, sometimes, many times, it is carried out in one fell swoop, where hundreds of thousands of people are killed or forcibly displaced, kind of like in one instant. But what Israel has kind of perfected, the strategy that Israel has kind of perfected over several decades, is gradual ethnic cleansing. In other words, laying the conditions for Palestinians that their only option is to leave. And they'll call this voluntary immigration, which is absurd because it's still ethnic cleansing. So what Israel has done in Gaza is they've left, most of the territory either unlivable. They've wiped out vast swaths of agricultural land so the Palestinians cannot grow crops and take care of agriculture and basically be self-sustaining when it comes to their own food sources. And what this has done is that's created the conditions for a mass expulsion campaign that is going to take months and years. And so basically, what we're seeing right now with Trump, for example, calling on Jordan and Egypt to, absorb 2 million Palestinian refugees, this, that's not going to happen. It's extremely unlikely for various reasons that Egypt and Jordan are going to absorb the entire 2 million population of Gaza. But what could happen is that this starts a trickle of exodus from Gaza. And as more and more people realize that, our homes are destroyed, our land is rendered toxic, we have no choice but to leave. So at that point, all Israel needs to do is open the Rafah crossing and prevent anyone from returning. And then that creates a one-way lane of exodus for Palestinians out of Gaza, in which over time, over the coming months and years, Israel and Netanyahu can achieve their goal of thinning out Gaza's population without, causing an international uproar that maybe an immediate exodus of 2 million people, an immediate mass displacement of 2 million people would cause. And I think this is the danger is getting too focused on the idea that 2 million people will be expelled immediately, because it won't be immediate, it will be gradual. And that's the real danger.
Well, talking about thinning out the population, Palestinians in Gaza are buried under the rubble. Probably several thousands have not been counted.
Yeah.
There are very grim calculations from reputable sources, such as the Lancet Medical Journal, estimating the total Palestinian deaths as a result of Israel's genocide as much higher than is currently stated. Once, people start removing that rubble, and then we're going to find out, for example, that this so-called official number of people killed in Gaza, which is now stands about 47,000, is much higher. How do you think the world will react to this?
It's a great question. Answering this question and going back to your earlier question about, what Palestinians in Gaza are going through at this point. I think it's, over the coming weeks and over the coming months, if the ceasefire holds, and that's a big if, but it's going to take months, if not years, for Palestinians to uncover all the dead bodies that remain, whether they're under tons and tons of rubble. There's over 50 million tons of rubble across the Gaza Strip that needs to be cleared, and Israel doesn't allow heavy digging equipment in. So that's going to take years, if not decades. But people are also many people were also killed and left in the street for their bodies to rot and be eaten by dogs and cats. Many have been buried in hastily dug mass graves. So the coming months and years are going to consist of not only millions of Palestinians dealing with the trauma of surviving this unprecedented onslaught, but they're going to be digging up their loved ones for years to come. And not only is that going to be a period of additional trauma and discovery, it's also, they're going to be learning how these people were killed. I think just the other day we saw a report of several bodies in, I believe, Jabalia that were found with bullet holes in their skulls, right? And that indicated that they were, shot in the head, potentially execution style. So we're also going to find out about a lot of the atrocities that Israel committed. And I think so much rests on the international community kind of putting their foot down. And saying enough is enough, right? We have this ceasefire, this first phase of the ceasefire. Now it's up to the rest of the international community, not just the United States, to pressure Israel to stay in the agreement, to allow the agreement to move on to phases 2 and 3, which would then lead to reconstruction in Gaza. But if they don't, if the international community kind of leaves it up to Israel again, as they have for the last year and a half, we're going to see the same return to genocide that we're so scared of. And I think in a counterintuitive way, the Trump administration kind of gives us an opportunity for this, because the silver lining, I guess you could say, of the Trump administration is that what his unapologetic embrace of Netanyahu and the far right in Israel does is that it shows U.S. complicity in the limelight. You know, it leaves no questions about U.S. complicity in Israel's genocide and ethnic cleansing. When Biden was president, you know, he prevaricated, he floated around all sorts of lofty human rights rhetoric while making sure that Israel had everything it needed to carry out the genocide, right? And what that did to the international community is, you know, it tricked them into believing that the U.S. was an honest peace broker in this process, but the U.S. isn't and has never been. So now is in many ways the last chance for the international community to recognize U.S. complicity in this process and take a step up. And we're seeing parts of that. We're seeing components of that, for example, with South Africa's genocide case at the ICJ. And just today, I think it was announced the new formation of what they're calling the Hague Group, which is a collection of countries ranging from Chile to Ireland to South Africa, who are looking into ways of holding Israel accountable because the U.S. won't. And I think that those types of initiatives are exactly what we need at this time, because now we're getting to a position where we can see U.S. complicity in this process, and it's now incumbent on the rest of the international community to take a bigger to play a bigger role in this and do what they can to hold Israel accountable, because they have the tools. The matter of enforcement.
Right. You've mentioned that the ethnic cleansing could happen over time, you know, whether it's 1.5 million or 2 million. I think the figure that Trump was saying 1.5 million. But, you know, this is a very dangerous statement. And Trump is not, he's basically doubling on that proposal, doubling down on that proposal. When he was questioned again, he said, yeah, Egypt and Jordan will take them. And people say, well, they're saying, no, they won't take them. And he said, no, they will. And then he went on later on, I think, during a separate interview, saying that we've done a lot for these people, meaning U.S. aid. And we know that Egypt is a big recipient of U.S. aid, so is Jordan. And so, you know, Trump feels like he has that power to force them to do that. And at the same time, the first foreign leader to come to the U.S. is going to be Benjamin Netanyahu. So, I mean, like everything that you're watching, at least on TV or reading in the news, say that there is something planned for the people in Gaza. And if it's going to happen, maybe it's not going to happen over time, and it's going to be, you know, they don't say that it's going to be forced transfer, but it's not forced transfer. They're using the term, I think they're using the term willing or something like this.
Voluntary immigration.
Voluntary, yeah. And, well, you know, if you starve someone almost to death and you prevent them from access to hospitals and schools and, you know, and then you could say, you know, you cannot blame them for wanting to leave, you know, somewhere else where they can have a roof over their head. And so they can say, well, this is voluntary. And meanwhile, they're twisting the arms of Sisi and King Abdullah. What are your thoughts about this?
This is exactly the threat. I mean, Israel's strategy has been to render life in Gaza unlivable and make it so that millions, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of Palestinians in Gaza just say, you know what, if I have a chance to leave and if someone's going to let me live in somewhere else, I will. And that's just a reality. Anyone left with the choices would do that. So I think, you know, Trump's threats are extremely serious. I think what he points out to in terms of the dynamic of, for example, Egypt and Jordan being almost entirely dependent on U.S. Support for the very survival of their regimes. So I think both countries, despite the fact that they've taken a strong stance and they said they will not be complicit in the forced displacement of Palestinians, they can be strong-armed. And I think that, so I do think it is like a very serious threat, but I also do think it's gonna, follow this model where it happens kind of like over time, and people are pushed out of Gaza bit by bit because life is unlivable. Uh, However, I also want to say that, when, countries like Jordan and Egypt say, no, we don't want to be complicit in the displacement of Palestinians also need an alternative, right? Because Palestinians can't live with nothing in Gaza, and in the current, they can't live amongst the rubble forever. So where the international community and the region comes back into play is that, these countries need to be saying, A, we will not be complicit in the forced displacement of millions of Palestinians from Gaza, but B, we are going to, do our best to make sure that there is a political solution to Gaza, and make sure that there is a solution that will see Gaza rebuilt, and that will enable Gazans to live their lives, and more than just survive, they need to thrive, and they have the same rights that anybody else living anywhere else does. So it can't just be a rejection of taking in the displaced, right? Egypt and Jordan can't just be like, okay, no, we're not going to take in any refugees, period. They need to also say, everyone does, not just Egypt and Jordan, the international community as a whole needs to do a lot more to A, hold Israel accountable, and make sure that there is a true, genuine reconstruction plan in Gaza, so that will give Palestinians in Gaza, a reason to stay.
Concurrently with the Gaza ceasefire, Israel has accelerated invading and bombarding multiple areas in the West Bank. We've been witnessing what's going on, for example, in Jenin, evacuating and killing civilians in much the same manner it did in Gaza. Trump's new ambassador to Israel states that there is no such things as Palestinians, and that Jews have a biblical right to all Judea and Samaria. That's what he refers to the West Bank.
Yeah.
Do you think that with all eyes are on Gaza now, the West Bank is going to be just totally lost because of what's happening there, and the international community doesn't even have the resources and the attention to to take care of what's going on in the West Bank?
Yeah, I think that is a huge risk, and I think what we're seeing now in the West Bank is that Israel is cashing in on its investment, right? The investment it made with the Trump administration to agree to a ceasefire in Gaza. I firmly believe that Israel and Netanyahu, to be specific, would not have agreed to a ceasefire in Gaza if he wasn't confident that he was going to get something out of it, right? So Netanyahu's mindset is like, okay, you know what? We've achieved a lot of our objectives in destroying Gaza up after a year and a half of intense bombardment. With Trump in power now and his promises of complicity and support, we're going to agree to a ceasefire in Gaza now and turn our attention to the West Bank, and turn our attention to Iran, because in many ways Israel now sees that it can get concessions, or it can get support from the Trump administration for its wider policies. And remember, Israel has, Israel's ethos is kind of built around the idea of maximum land with minimum Palestinians, right? And this is achieved in different ways in the West Bank versus Gaza versus within the 48 borders. So yes, Israel is now turning its attention to the West Bank, where, and this kind of began long before the ceasefire, but what they've been doing is tightening occupation restrictions, tightening economic blockades, making life for Palestinians in the West Bank financially and economically unfeasible, in hopes that this will also trickle a gradual exodus of Palestinians from the West Bank, because in the West Bank they have the same goal of thinning out the Palestinian population. They might frame it differently. It might look slightly different than what's happening in Gaza, but that's the same raison d'etre, if you wanna put it that way. And I think that is, and that's what we're seeing now. And it's very much Netanyahu cashing in on his investment with the Trump administration.
You've mentioned Ben Gvir and Smotrich, and of course their supporters, they have been expressing their dissatisfaction with the ceasefire and prisoner exchange because they say that this does not meet the objectives of the war. This sounds like a declaration of intent to resume bombing Gaza and killing more Palestinians once the last Israeli detainee is released. Is this your biggest fear?
Yeah, I think absolutely. My biggest fear is a resumption of the genocide and the resumption of the most intense version of the genocide in Gaza. And as I said before, Netanyahu is facing immense pressure, not only from the far right members of his coalition, but from the Israeli public in general. I think earlier today I read a report either in Haaretz or Times of Israel that said only 4% of Israelis believe that Israel achieved its objectives in Gaza. So I think we also need to be very clear about what those objectives are, right? Because those objectives, they say it's destroying Hamas and securing the hostages, but what it really is destroying Gaza and laying the conditions for ethnic cleansing. Those are the objectives. And right now, Israelis see 2 million or so Palestinians still in Gaza, and they're not going to be satisfied until that number is reduced and that population is thinned out. So as it stands, if I had to put my money on it, I would say that Israel will resume its campaign in Gaza after either the first phase or the second phase. However, again, we go back to the role of the international community. There's one argument that says a resumption of Israel's campaign in Gaza is bad for the Trump administration because the Trump administration is focused on its regional objectives of normalization with Saudi Arabia, for example. And if Israel resumes its onslaught in Gaza, that stops normalization. So there is an argument that says Trump might pressure them to stick with the ceasefire. But I don't want to put my faith in the Trump administration. I think it really needs to come down to the rest of the international community, Europe, the global South, to put their foot down and use the economic and diplomatic leverage that they wield on Israel and say, listen, if you resume the genocide in Gaza and if you resume your assault, you are going to face an array of sanctions and punitive measures from us. So this is the time for the international community to step in and fill the void that the U.S. has left in global leadership. Because the U.S. is kind of on the descent. It's now time for the rest of the international community to step in.
Well, we talk about the international community, and maybe I'm with you on the global South. But what we've been seeing out of Europe, the ICC has issued warrants for the arrest of Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant, and yet we've seen several European countries working their way around these warrants. Poland allowing him to visit, Poland during the commemoration of Auschwitz, the 80th, commemoration of Auschwitz. Germany is reneging, maybe France, and so forth. So how do we count on Europe to stand up against the support, or the limitless, I should say, support and protection of the United States?
It's a great question, and I agree with you. I wouldn't count on Europe to do much of anything, but I do think there are some partners within Europe and within that sphere that have been supportive of accountability measures upon Israel. For example, Ireland, with its support for South Africa's case at the ICJ. Ireland also just joined the Hague Group earlier this morning that we discussed earlier, and then Spain is also another example of a country that, while there's questions about whether they've enforced it, has been, refusing entry for ships that are shipping weapons. And again, I preface that with we're not sure if they're actually enforcing it. But all in all, you're right. Europe, we cannot count on Europe alone to hold Israel accountable, just like we can't count on the Trump administration. And this is again where our sights turn to the global South. And obviously, when we say global South, there's a lot of people mean different things, right? But I think, for example, this Hague Group is a great example of the pressure that the specific countries within the global South can wield if they organize effectively. And so I think at this point, it's there's, for many reasons, they need to do what they can to make sure that Israel faces punitive measures for not only in the case that they resume the assault on Gaza, but for all what they've already done. I'm very much of the belief that even if this was resolved, even if this ceasefire lasts, Israel can't go on as business as usual after it committed a genocide. This has fundamentally changed a lot of things, and I think in many ways there is no returning back to the status quo.
What's the role of Arab countries? I mean, besides neighboring countries like Egypt and Jordan, wealthy Arab countries, Saudi Arabia, the Gulf, and so forth. I mean, they've been.
I'm of the belief that no hope should be put in the Arab, and I'll say regimes, not countries, because of course the Arab people are extremely supportive of the Palestinian people. If it was up to them, if these countries were democracies, we would see sanctions and we would see economic and diplomatic pressure on Israel like never before. Israel wouldn't be allowed to get away with genocide. But because these Arab states are led by regimes, who autocratic and regimes who are not democratically elected or accountable to their populations, that's why we see complicity in Israel's genocide and in Israel's occupation and ethnic cleansing. So, when we think about countries like Jordan, countries like Egypt, as we said before, Egypt and Jordan, the regimes that rule them now, are entirely dependent on the U.S. for their very survival. If they decided, and unfortunately, the king and Sisi, they might in heart they might want to do something for Palestinians, but they know that their survival rests upon the U.S. goodwill, and if they cross U.S. interests, they're risking their own survival of their own regimes. So unfortunately, I'm not putting too much faith in Arab governments to intervene and to do their part in holding Israel accountable. I really think there's more hope in other countries in the global South, countries like South Africa, countries like Ireland, Spain. Not to say that those two are in the global South, but Colombia, Chile, and in many ways their strength can only come in numbers. So it's really a matter of them organizing together. That's where I think there is a lot more potential than the Arab regimes that are compromised and dependent on U.S. Protection and support for their own survival.
What's the role of the Palestinian Authority?
The Palestinian Authority is complicit. I mean, we saw them the other day cracking down on Palestinian resistance fighters in Jenin, and I think that their model and their reason for existence has been proven a failure. They do more to serve and act as subcontractors to the Israeli occupation forces than they do to protect Palestinians. For example, where are the PA when Israeli settlers are rampaging through Palestinian towns throughout the West Bank? Where are they? They're busy killing resistance fighters in Jenin and journalists.
I'm asking you this question because they're floating the idea, or at least before Trump dropped his bombshell about transferring 1.5 million Palestinians, saying that the reconstruction in Gaza will happen through the UAE and international funding, but the UAE will manage kind of reconstruction, and the Palestinian Authority will be brought back to rule Gaza. And my question is, even if that happens, will the people in Gaza accept them?
I think the people of Gaza will accept them if they are seen as having a role in the process. If the people of Gaza have a role in the governing process. However, I think there's wide recognition that if the PA does come to rule or to govern the Gaza Strip, and the question of if they can is another question. I don't think they have the institutional capacity to do that. However, I think they will be seen in many ways as again riding in on the back of an Israeli tank. And I think that many Palestinians in Gaza will not accept PA governance. But there is a lot of support for unity. The most popular political model in Gaza is neither Hamas nor Fatah, nor the PA, but a unity government. And I think there are already ideas and proposals being floated around for some form of a unified technocrat government to govern Gaza in the reconstruction phase. Obviously, this will necessitate a lot of external support from regional actors and the international community. But I think that is what Palestinians in Gaza want, and that's what they deserve. That's what's going to give them the most agency in this process, is a unified governing body that is led by technocrats, people who are experienced and knowledgeable about leading and governing. And the issue is that the U.S. and Israel will never accept never have and never will accept a government that includes Hamas, and that includes this specific unity makeup the Palestinians deserve, and is honestly the only both just and workable solution for Gaza. So the main obstacle here is the U.S. and Israel, again, who are putting their foot down and saying no to unity.
No international leader can claim ignorance of the atrocities Israel has committed since October 7th. What must be done by world leaders to restore international law and uphold principles that are the foundation of the Geneva Convention?
Well, I think international leaders can start by upholding their duties under international law. For example, the ICC has already issued arrest warrants for Netanyahu, for example, and this is as easy as just abiding by their obligations under international law. So when Netanyahu goes to Spain or France or Germany, he should be arrested. Whether that's going to happen is another question. But I really fundamentally see this point as a crossroads in which the international legal framework has been tested and has failed. And if the international community wants this quote unquote rules-based order to survive over the next decade, they're going to have to resurrect it, and that's going to entail abiding by international law and abiding by these international regulations and norms. And the first step of that will be arresting Netanyahu if he ever sets foot on international territory, as per the ICC order.
Tariq Kenney-Shawa, thank you for coming on Arab Talk.
Thanks, Jamal. It was an honor. Anytime.
Well, that's the voice in the face of Tariq Kenney-Shawa, detailing how the ceasefire could be nothing more than a pause for Israel to escalate its ethnic cleansing of Palestinians in Gaza. It's a really good analysis, Jamal, but as you mentioned, that interview was done prior to the more recent Trump administration of denying Palestinians a right of return and continuing this kind of threat to forcibly remove Palestinians from Gaza. Despite that, I think Tariq puts it in a very interesting context. We all kind of understand that Israel has no intention whatsoever of stopping the ethnic cleansing of Palestine.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, Tariq is on point because he said that basically Netanyahu does not want a ceasefire. His cabinet does not want a ceasefire. Several members of his cabinet don't want to see a ceasefire. And they'll find an excuse or a pretext to resume the war. And now they are basically emboldened by President Trump's statement. So that's even more of a reason for the ceasefire to collapse, basically. And as you mentioned early on, Donald Trump said that his plan, just to talk about that, to take over Gaza, and it would not include a right of return for the more than 2 million Palestinians that live there. And he said no alternative. He's saying, that there is no other solution. Of course, his statement or remarks basically met with rejection by Arab countries and many countries around the world, except for Israel Prime Minister and his cabinet. They see this as interesting. In fact, actually, just in a recent interview with Fox, Brett Baer Trump said that he would own the Gaza Strip. So I don't know who would own the Gaza Strip. Is it the United States, or is it the Trump International Real Estate, whatever, and Casino Company? I don't know what he calls his company,
or the Kushner company, because
or the
that's the
Kushner.
other aim.
Yeah, because he said he would own the Gaza Strip and declared it would be a real estate development for the future.
Yeah, I mean, I think the extent of the criminality and the delusional statements coming from Donald Trump, it might be easy to just laugh it off, but at the same time, we need to take seriously what this individual is saying, Jamal, because Donald Trump has telegraphed for months, and after he was sworn into office, has engaged in less than 1 month a pattern of dismantling the infrastructure of our system of governance. And laying off hundreds of thousands of people is his plan, shutting down departments and organizations and cabinet level departments. He and Elon Musk are on a tear to dismantle all the infrastructure within the US government. Now, when he telegraphed that before, people didn't believe him. They said it was all bluster. There's no bluster here, Jamal. And so for Donald Trump to make the announcement that Palestinians in Gaza will leave, we need to take it seriously, despite how crazy, delusional, illegal, immoral his statements are. The key factors here are a couple things. What is King Abdullah going to do? He's having his arm twisted right now. What is President al-Sisi going to do? What are the Arab League countries going to do? What is the world community going to do, Jamal? Are they going to stand by and watch this ethnic cleansing and genocide and pushing out of the 2 million Palestinians in Gaza happen before their eyes and not step in? The one thing that is interesting, Palestinians in Gaza have said categorically, we will not leave. And Netanyahu instructed his, new defense minister to make a plan to have Palestinians voluntarily leave Gaza. I have breaking news for Netanyahu and the Israelis. Palestinians are not going to voluntarily leave Gaza. They're not going to voluntarily leave anywhere. So I think what we're facing, Jamal, is pretty significant bloodshed, more ethnic cleansing, and more genocide.
Well, Trump insists, even though, as we've mentioned, Egypt and Jordan have rejected these plans, and most of the Arab states, or at least the statements that I've heard from the largest Arab states like Saudi Arabia and others, have declared that this is a non-starter. But then Trump keeps insisting. Then said, no, they will. We give them a lot of money. I mean, this is billions of dollars, and they will accept. And so he basically said that he would build up to 6 new sites for Palestinians to live outside Gaza, in effect, permanent refugee camps underwritten by the U.S. president. And then again, when he asked if Palestinians will have the right to return to Gaza, he repeated, no, they wouldn't, because they're going to have much better housing. So if they're going to have much better housing, so what type of housing is he building in Gaza? If he's offering them what? If he's saying that Gaza is going to be at the Riviera level, and then Palestinians will have much better housing where? In the desert, in Sinai Desert in Egypt, or in Egypt. Also, I should add now, you have Netanyahu, who's emboldened by this statement, saying, well, Saudi Arabia should take like a million or a million or so Palestinians, because they have a lot of land. They have a lot of land. I mean, he's dictating, and they're a wealthy country. They have a lot of land. Why don't they take, I mean, nobody's saying, well, why don't the Israelis who came from Russia and came from Ukraine and so on go back, I mean, to where they came from, and that will solve the problem? Or why won't the Palestinians who were in 1948 ethnically cleansed from Jaffa, Haifa, Akka, and so on return to their homes, and while they're rebuilding Gaza? So there is no other solution but really to ethnically cleanse Palestinians. These are Palestinians who have been ethnically cleansed in 1948, to repeat that, but now to push them even further outside historic Palestine.
Yeah, Jamal, and I have to share with you what my concerns are. The idea that Palestinians would trust King Abdullah or President Sisi of Egypt is kind of a bizarre concept. Unfortunately, there is a very dark history with the Kingdom of Jordan selling out Palestinians on numerous occasions, including Abdullah's father. We have to be very careful, despite what King Abdullah.
I have to interject here and disagree with you. Actually, I have to disagree with you. I mean, there were differences between Palestinians and Jordanians, but Jordan is the only country actually in the Middle East that has taken Palestinians and gave them citizenship, that they are Jordanian citizenship, that they have Jordanian. They have they have Jordanian full Jordanian citizenship. I mean, they're not the West people who live in the West Bank, but people who live in the East Bank. And they constitute more than 50%. That's why the danger in Jordan, despite what you're saying, what you're referring to, and King Abdullah has rejected that, emphatically rejected what Trump is saying. And also the Jordanians supported the Palestinian cause.
But then why would these public statements give Palestinians or anybody in the world community any sense of comfort? These are just political statements made, publicly as a negotiating tactic, right? So, Jordan cannot survive without the financial support of the United States. Egypt cannot survive without the financial support of the United States. Let me ask you this. How much confidence do you have that Sisi and Abdullah can stand up to Donald Trump?
Well, I mean, we don't know, but all what we know is that they rejected this proposal. And actually, if Egypt decided to open the Rafah border, maybe several thousand of Palestinians would have left already. And they refused to do so. They've only taken in some Palestinians who needed medical care and so forth. So as you know, in fact, now, I mean, for many years, we've been saying that Gaza is the largest open prison because of Israel controls it by land, air, and sea, and so on. And now Netanyahu is saying, oh, it's not our fault. It's because of Egypt is not letting them leave. But in fact, that's what the Egyptians are refusing to open the Rafah, not because they don't want the Palestinian ends, it's because they know they don't want to create that ethnic cleansing goal that Israel wants to do. Now, as far as the money, which at least I've read some reports that the United States offered Egypt up to $250 billion in aid and forgiveness of debt and so forth to entice Sisi to take, about 1 million Palestinians or so and put them in the Sinai. Because remember, the initial plan even was like, oh, that was temporary. But now Trump is like upping the ante and saying, no, that's not temporary. They can't return. And they've rejected that. And what I could say about this, well, then this is the time for wealthy Arab countries, especially Saudi Arabia and others, to step in and fill the gap. Because yes, Egypt has more than 100 million people living there, and the economy is in shambles, and they don't have the resources. Jordan does not have the resources also. And maybe they can fill the gap if the United States decides to cut aid. But as I've mentioned on another show, the bulk of aid that goes to Egypt, remember that, is part of the Camp David agreement. It has nothing to do with just financial aid. That's because part of that agreement was to make peace with Israel, to get rid of the Russian advisors, all these things to make sure that the Sinai Peninsula is demilitarized. So if the United States basically cuts off aid to Egypt, in other words, it's reneging on the Camp David agreement, then the peace treaty between Egypt and Israel could collapse, and then Egypt is free to move its military into the Sinai Peninsula and do whatever it pleases, invite the Chinese, invite the Russians, whatever, to help it. I mean, that's the whole reason that they receive the money. So I don't want people to be fooled about this. It's not just like a giveaway. That's the bulk of it. There is also financial aid was going to Egypt through U.S. aid and others, and now Trump is shutting down U.S. aid. So they lose that part anyways. All countries from in the Middle East or Africa or other countries, they lose that part if he shuts it down completely.
I'm just less optimistic than you, Jamal, that Trump cares about treaties between Israel and Egypt. I think he's doubling down. He's going to triple down. I think he's going to force this issue. And the one thing that is kind of not necessarily the wild card, but the unspoken that is now being spoken, they don't care what Egypt says. They don't care what Jordan says. Israel will force Palestinians, this is what I worry about, will militarily force Palestinians at gunpoint to either be killed or to leave. That's the ethnic cleansing that they have been doing since 1948, Jamal. And now they have the green light of Donald Trump to ethnically cleanse Palestinians. The idea that Palestinians would voluntarily leave Gaza is rubbish. It will never happen. So we can talk about Abdullah, we can talk about Sisi. The real issue on the ground, Jamal, is the Israeli military having free rein now with Netanyahu getting the blessing from Trump to continue the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians. It's going to be a very dark number of months.
Well, I don't disagree. I mean, Trump could do anything he wants. I mean, that's what he's been doing. I mean, he just posted today a picture that he's bringing back plastic straws, like anything he dislikes, he's like, well, in reverse, he put a photo of a plastic straw while he's sipping on his Diet Coke, and he said, we're bringing back plastic straws, I mean, it's like as if this is a great achievement but anyway, he can decide he by executive order whether it's legally or illegally, as we've been seeing that. But one thing we know, that forcibly displacement of an occupied group is an international crime, and is ethnic cleansing. And if he wants to go down in history, or maybe the ICC will issue a warrant for his arrest because of his contribution to ethnic cleansing, even though we don't respect that and whatever. But those warrants, as far as I've read, they are irreversible, and there is no statute of limitations on those. So, yeah, I mean, we're living in the world. It's like, whatever Donald Trump wants to do, he will do it. But whether it's legal, that's a whole different story.
Yeah, he doesn't. I mean, two things. He doesn't care. He doesn't care. And he doesn't care. He doesn't care. Full stop. He doesn't care about Palestinians. He doesn't care about anything but himself and these kind of grandiose, and I think I could say this word now, fascistic notions of governance, where all the guardrails of government are not subject to, control, are not subject to checks and balances. He's exercising total executive control, much like the monarchy. So we need to be prepared for him not caring. I don't think he cares about international law. He certainly doesn't care about Palestinians or their integral, undeniable connection to historic Palestine. He doesn't care. We need to prepare ourselves for the worst. And the last thing I just like to say, Jamal, is that the failure of the opposition Democrats to do anything in the face of these grotesque violations of law, morality, international law is just so disgusting. The obedience that they're engaged with the Trump, just letting him roll over with these ridiculous statements that they're making. There's no opposition anymore. So this is a very dangerous time.
Well, quickly, I just want to mention two things. With all that said, I just want to remind President Trump that he said that he wanted to be remembered as a man of peace. So, and he has the ambition to win the Nobel Peace Prize. And so let's see, I mean, how is that going to work when he gives the green light to Israel and they start dropping those, whatever, 4,000-ton bombs on Palestinians, killing children and women? And that's one thing. And then the other thing, maybe I think he should have paid attention to what happened during the halftime break, during the Super Bowl, and the message in that performance to what's going on in the United States. That was a very clear message. And then, of course, I think most networks edited out the dancer who went out with the Palestinian Sudanese flag at the end of the show. But
yeah, but it's all over social. It's all over
millions, hundreds of millions have seen that. So the Palestinian, what I'm saying is that there are people of conscience that will take a risk to remind the world that the Palestinian cause is just and ethnic cleansing is wrong.
I just think it's going to be ironic historically, Jamal, that the only people globally to stand up to Donald Trump will be the Palestinians. It's not going to be the Democrats. It's not going to be Canada. It's not going to be Mexico. It's not going to be the EU. It's not going to be the ICC. The only people in the world who have the courage to reject Trump are going to be the Palestinians. That is an amazing statement.
You've been listening to Arab Talk on KPOO San Francisco 89.5 FM. Go to our website, arabtalkradio.com, to download the latest shows, and we'll talk to you next week.
See you next week.